Welcome to Sprinkle of Hope podcast with your host, Jason. And we're so excited to have an awesome guest with us today, Nate Rifkin. And I'm going to let him introduce himself this time. We usually give a little introduction, but his story is really cool. And I think it's really inspiring. So I want him to kind of tell a little bit about his background and kind of where he's came from and where he's headed. So Nate, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit about yourself, that'd be awesome.
I'd love to. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I mean, I came from a really emotionally shut down family, and I was a depressed, angry kid. And it got worse and worse as I grew up. I mean, high school, I stayed home and watched TV when all my high school classmates were out at prom night. I went to college, thought it would be better, but I was still just like that same awkward kid. Didn't care about my grades, but I still had a dream to be an entrepreneur. So I dropped out after 3 semesters.
Mm.
And I told no one I was leaving. Like, I didn't make any friends. I think the only person who knew I left was my roommate when he came back in after like a break and like this other side of the dorm was cleared out. I mean, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I moved to Boulder, Colorado. Side note, just because I was inspired by the movie Dumb and Dumber because they went to like Aspen. I'm not kidding.
Love it.
Yeah. So when I was 7 years old, I'm like, Colorado sounds cool. So I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm going. Um, and I actually did start an internet-based business there in the fitness niche. And I was using my own personal credit. And I had some, like, I made some sales, had some hit or miss success. This was like in 2006, like dinosaur time on the internet. Um, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I started going deeper and deeper into debt. And because I didn't really have any business sense. And I was still like that same depressed, awkward kid. Like, I was an adult technically, but still the same one. I started same kid, and I started to max out my credit cards. And it was getting really scary. I'd have like a bill show up in the mail, and I'd like drop it on the floor and drop another letter on top. Like, kind of, that's a
Wow.
bad financial strategy, by the way, but that's what I did. Um, and I was still like really depressed. I was lonely and I couldn't get a date to save my life. And it was just like, I was working hard. I was trying, I was studying self-help, but like something was missing. I was setting goals and not achieving them. And at my worst, like I had some days I'd end up on the floor in a fetal position, just like silently
Mm.
crying. And I thought about killing myself, and I started drinking alcohol every morning. But what turned it around was I started actually diving more into my spiritual life. And I had a teacher that taught me meditation from the Taoist tradition. I didn't know what Taoism was, but the meditation sounded kind of cool. And I started to actually feel better. And when I started to feel better, I stopped drinking in the morning. It's not like I cut alcohol out of my life, but it was like, I don't need this to get through the day.
Mm.
And I started doing it and more, and other people started to notice a difference in me. And it wasn't overnight, but my depression started to like kind of ebb away, and I started to actually really stop hating myself and start loving myself. And I realized, like, this is the best thing I've ever done. So that was 12 years ago. And now my mission is like to tell other people about it, especially if someone's like frustrated and like thinking positive hasn't worked for them. It's like, this might. So yeah, that's kind of that's the short version of all the weird stuff that happened to me.
So Nate, do you attribute your so you're overcoming your depression and all of those things to the meditation, or are there other things that you have found that have helped you to overcome those things?
You know, I think what happened was the meditation that I did, and it could be like, and it was just like Taoism helped me, but different kinds of meditation could help anyone. I think, it's
Right.
all about finding resonates with you. Um, and the way I like to say it is, it helped everything else that was supposed to work finally work. It's like, it was like the foundation, and on top of that, I could start like having better perspective on how I operate a business. So my business got better. I could heal old like wounding and be able to see my own patterns.
Mhm.
And then my relationships got better. So it's kind of like it opened everything up for me. That's how I like to say it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a lot of deep stuff that you're talking about. I'm really grateful that you're willing to open your mouth and open your life to us and our listeners. I think often we learn from each other and learn how to handle life and navigate through everyone is navigating life. Might be different, but I think there's lessons to be learned for everyone. So how is Nate doing today? What are you working on today, and how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I mean, I'm doing a lot of writing because after like a decade, I've really started the process of turning around to being like, I got to spread the word about everything I kind of went through. So I'm one of those crazy writers that's kind of locked up in his office most of the day. You know, I'm living in Colorado with my wife. Fortunately, she's a writer too, so she gets it. Somehow we get along too. It's a miracle. So that's what I'm up to today. I published my first book earlier this year on my story, and I've been kind of talking about that ever since then, and also working on another book. And I'm actually helping my wife right now because she's publishing a book herself. So and it's really beautiful because I've maintained my practice, and I've realized that it's been a constant lighthouse. So even if my life gets like there's a lot of storms going on in my life, it's sort of the lighthouse that brings me home. And and everyone else I know who engages in like a spiritual practice, they tend to say the same thing.
Yeah, and I love meditation because I think that oftentimes when we stop and just ponder and think and just think about life or whatever we're pondering on is, so how do you do your meditations, or how does this kind of work? And because I know there's many different ways to meditate and use your mind and think of those kinds of things. But so how does your, because I'm not familiar with your particular type of meditation, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question because especially because when I first heard about meditation, and this is going back maybe 15 years ago, I tried it. I don't know. And the instruction is pretty vague. It's like, it's just all this just sitting quietly and let your thoughts come and go. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then 15 minutes later, it's like, can I get my 15 minutes back? It's like, what's up? It's like I feel hazy and now I'm just irritated. But if anyone like hears meditation, they're just like, all right, whatever. I tried it. It's like I get it. But the way the Taoists do it is really cool because it's a very body-based meditation. And one of the ways I like to describe it is if you put one hand, like your left hand on your belly, and then your right hand on your chest, and when you breathe, the task you have is to make sure your left hand on your belly rises and falls with your breath, and that your hand on your chest actually does not. It stays still, so that you're programming your body with like instant feedback to expand your diaphragm downward to open your lungs all the way, because your lungs are just empty tissue. They can't move themselves. They can only be moved. And breathing deep like this has a lot of wonderful benefits. It lowers stress hormones, increases creativity. I think it does. It gives your internal organs a massage, which kind of sounds kind of goofy at first, but I think, and there's a lot of evidence for the fact that a lot of trauma is actually stored in the tissues of our body. So when you breathe deeply, you're actually starting to work through that. Now, here's the really cool part. All I've talked about is just breathing deeply, and where does the meditation come in? Well, here's where it comes in. You also focus your mind on the sensations in your belly and ask yourself, oh, what does it feel like when I breathe deep into my belly? Do I feel a cool warmth there? Do I feel pressure? Do I feel like any kind of cool energy? And you're switching your mind from problem solving, like from whatever's going on in your day, to focusing on a feeling. So now it's receptive to a feeling and sensation instead of trying to analyze something. So instead of thinking it's like, oh yeah, I got to reply to that person's email. Now it's like, oh, what does my belly feel like? So you're actually grounding yourself down within your body. When you do this and you you do consistently, you will slip into a meditative state where your thoughts just kind of quiet away. And the best part is it works better because you're not trying to do it, because you're not doing the whole meditative version of like, don't think of a pink elephant. That's
Right,
that's how a
right.
lot of people meditate. They're just like, don't think of a thought. It's like your thoughts just blow up.
Yeah.
It's
So
true.
I know, right? So that's how, and it's actually a lot of traditions throughout the world. They'll start with the breath. That's why it's universal. It works so well. But I learned it first with Taoism, and that's how I like to meditate. I don't even call it that. I just call it deep breathing into my belly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jason and I have talked about breathing a little bit here and there, but to me, it gives that other layer that you're thinking about your breathing. I love that. You also mentioned something about a lighthouse, and I don't want to just breeze over that because I think the lighthouse analogy is amazing. When I think about a lighthouse, I think people are being drawn to that light and they're being shown the way. So I love that you said that. You also talked about your book. What's your book title, and how can our listeners find it?
Oh, thank you. It's called, thanks. It's called the Standing Meditation. And it's all about how one of the major practices I learned is meditation. It's also done in a standing position. So talk about even adding more body-based ideas and more focus to a meditation. And yeah, thank you for bringing up the lighthouse analogy, because I like to say, it's just like having a spiritual path and meditating. It doesn't remove challenges from your life, but
Right.
it gives you it changes who you're on the inside, so you can face those challenges better. And it can give you like the lighthouse, it can give you something to come home to.
Yeah.
And because if you're lost in a storm, it could be an emotional storm or something going on in your life. If you don't have that one pillar that you can guide yourself by, it's awful. But if you do have one, it's going to be, you could still go through a painful time, but at least there's going to be hope.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it. I love that analogy as well. And I just picture it, us as human beings, shining our light out to the world in the foggy state that we're all in, and those few lost souls that can find that light, they are drawn to it, right? And Shane and I have talked about us putting our energy out into the world, and receiving that energy back. And so we're, and I totally agree with you. We need more hope, and that hope is getting out there, and we're sprinkling it, and we're wanting to get that hope back as we just help each other to create a more unified front. So I appreciate your words so far. This has been a great conversation.
It's beautiful, and it reminds me of how what I learned from a lot of my teachers is, because people often ask about giving back. And one of the cool things is, if you do a daily discipline of meditation, and kind of just work on changing your energy little by little, when you go out in the world, even if people aren't consciously picking up on it, you're a force of positivity in the world everywhere you go. It could be as little as something where you walk by someone and smile and nod at an airport or something like that. And it'll have that ripple effect. So yeah, right on. Yeah. It's a sprinkle.
Yeah.
That's right.
Sprinkles. Yeah, that's awesome. So those of you who can see Nate can see a little heart emoji behind him. We mentioned that earlier. Love that. I just love that that's behind you, and it's really radiating the things that I think that you have learned in your life. I would guess that at some point in your life you wouldn't have had that behind you, and it's totally changed for you now.
Oh yeah, you're totally right. It's actually a little pillow. It's a pillow with the little heart eyes and the smiley face emoji. And yeah, like I was telling y'all before the show, it's my wife's, but I'm like, oh, I'm definitely keeping that in the background. And yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring that up, because yeah, absolutely. 15 years ago or 20 years ago or longer before that, I would have definitely not resonated with it. And that can be one of the most frustrating aspects of trying to change yourself, is when you're in a bad spot, you will often not resonate with the people and places that could actually help you, because you're just you have a different perspective. Your brain is actually programmed to not seeing the more positive aspects of life. And I don't say that in like a blaming or shaming way. It's like, I've been there. It's really, really frustrating. And that's why the only thing that really worked for me was starting with the inner work, and the deep breathing and the body based work first, because then afterwards it's like, actually, now I got a different perspective. It's like, oh yeah, there's that friend I haven't reached out to in a long time. And all of a sudden you're like, you've got a connection with someone who's a lot different from maybe the toxic people that you've been running into more often. So I don't know about you guys, but throughout my journey, like, the biggest breakthroughs I had, I couldn't really predict them. Right. All I could do is just kind of work on myself, and then major breakthroughs happened.
Yep.
Yeah. And I really find it interesting, kind of, what you're talking about is, and I feel like it's sometimes a vicious cycle, because when you're in this like negative state, right, you just keep thinking these negative thoughts. And so what is that energy you're going to attract, right? The negative energy. And so it's like this constant cycle, and you're like, how do I break this? But I think you brought it back to a good point, which is taking one step and starting with yourself and working on that inner work. And then, which the other cool picture behind you is the picture of the globe, right? And so I'm kind of picturing it as like you're shedding that light and love to the entire globe, and it's just slowly going around the whole thing, and that's what you're doing. And so I just love this idea and concept of just starting with yourself and then radiating outwards around the whole globe.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah. I love this. I love this little poster board.
Yeah, it's awesome.
and yeah. And you reminded me of how even when your thoughts are really bad, you can still take some time out and take some slow, deep breaths. Right. Because the cool part is you can think horrible thoughts the whole time. That it's like, don't fight them. Just breathe deeply while you do it, and then watch as eventually they slip away.
Yeah.
It's I think it's jujitsu or something, where it's like you use your opponent's force against them. I think, or judo or something like that. You could tell I'm not a martial artist. So.
Maybe it's the force, right? Maybe it's the Star Wars force.
Totally.
I love the things that you're talking about. I think the thing that I keep going back to is that every one of us is similar in that we have struggles in life, but we have to find ways to navigate through that. In your case, you took this meditation or breathing, and that was your lighthouse. I think every one of us has to grab onto something, one thing, and that's all it takes, is that one thing to change our life. It's never too late to change your life. And then once you do, like you do, Nate, you're opening your mouth and really shedding that light to the world. I think it's awesome.
Oh, right on it. And you reminded me of there's a quote by Bruce Lee. It's like, I fear not the martial artist who practices 10,000 moves one time. I fear the martial artist who practices one move 10,000 times.
Yeah.
So I think it's, you're right on. It's absolutely the same, because, and it's funny you mentioned that. When I started practicing, I started with 60 seconds, and I added 5 seconds a day, but I did it every day. Mm-hmm. And I really just dropped everything else I was doing in my life in terms of like self-care at that point. And I just focused on, that was just where I was at. I was just so fed up and frustrated. And I kept on increasing the time. And I think that was my saving grace. It was the fact that I did it every single day, even if it was just a little bit, because by the time I did it, I don't know how long, maybe a few weeks or something like that. I think everyone's different. It became part of my identity. So yeah, I think you're right on. It's about instead of having to like search for like try this and then do this, and like you have to add on a bunch of fancy practices, it's searching and testing for the one that resonates with you, and then taking it deeper and deeper and really making it yours and exploring the different layers of it. And I think there's one thing out there that everyone is going to resonate with. And as much as I wish I could say like, oh, for you try this, or for you try this, I mean, I think part of it is we do have to explore and find it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think especially with the breathing, at least, Shane and I, we talked about this, I don't know, almost a year ago when we really started, using that breathing and breath work and things like that. And, and we started trying it and just testing it and doing it with my family and things like that. And it really does help. It brings your focus inward. You're right. Those thoughts, they just kind of fly away like birds, and you really bring yourself back to center or grounded or whatever it is that you're working. I totally believe in breath work, and I think it's a great thing. I mean, it's the first thing we do when we're born, and it's the last thing we do before we die. So, why not use it? It's a very simple thing, and it's easy.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because in Taoism, we actually talk about that, how when you're born and when you die is exactly true. It's so cool. And it's there, and it's your friend. Why not use it consciously?
Yeah.
And it's easy, and it's so easy. It's also easy to forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, true that. Yeah. Amen. This has been a fantastic conversation. So right kind of near the end, Shane and I, we always like to do what we call the double down dose. And what it is it's 2 questions. I'll ask one, and then Shane will ask a follow-up, and then we'll ask a few maybe additional questions, but we'll wrap up from there. But the first question is what is your definition of hope?
My definition of hope is that it's when you base your beliefs on your own self-worth, and not the external circumstances, which are always going to be changing. You judge value based on your own worth instead of what the outside world is saying.
Awesome. That's great. We love talking about hope. We love asking these questions. We have deepened our meaning of hope. So we came up with a acronym HOPE, HOPE, heart, overcome, passion, and enough, just because we love talking about hope. But I want to talk about the overcome. When you think about overcoming, what comes to mind?
It's a great question, and it's similar to what I think of as hope. It's like overcoming to me means when the inner overcomes the outer. Actually, okay, this reminds me of it's a funny story. It was told to me by one of my teachers. His name is Peter Ragnar. So one day in the universe, there's God, and darkness comes to God. Like Mr. Darkness comes to God and says, God, I have a complaint. Every time the sun comes around, I get scared and I run away. So this is, so I'm coming to you with this complaint. So God's like, oh, okay. So God goes to the sun and goes, Mr. Sun, okay, we got a problem. So Mr. Darkness over here, he's telling me that whenever you come out, he runs away. And the sun looks at God and goes, who's Mr. Darkness? So it's kind of a weird story, but the idea is like overcoming to me is like when your own light, when you have that, when you're able to cultivate that own worth, that self-worth, that belief in yourself. And actually it's not even cultivate, it's realize and remember, because you have that worth,
right?
You have that inherent worth. It's just you have it. It's when you keep remembering that you have that worth, and you are able to then craft a life for yourself that reflects that worth, no matter what the outside circumstance. And that's going to look different for everyone, just like everyone has a different spiritual walk and practice.
Yeah.
Everyone has a different sort of life that they want to create for themselves. It's not going to mean a perfect like Disneyland life, but I think it means overcoming the outer challenges in your life that are oftentimes reflected in the inner things you got to work out in yourself. So that's what overcoming means to me.
I love that. And I love that you brought up self-worth, and, because I think, I believe it's absolutely true. We're naturally born with all the worth that we need or whatever. And so you don't have to do anything to get any more worth. I don't know if you have children, but when each one of my kids were born, I loved them, and they didn't do anything. They just took a breath, and I loved them right then, and it's an instantaneous love. Wasn't anything external. So I love that you brought that up, because I think everybody has worth, and deep down they may not believe it or think it, but they do have worth.
Truly. Even if you don't believe you do, you do.
Yeah. Exactly.
I love the story that you shared too, Nate, because I was just envisioning that the son doesn't see anyone else. He's just being who he is. And so he doesn't see the darkness, which I just love that story. It's so cool.
Story, yeah. When the light's there, there just is no darkness. It's just, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it. It kind of reminded me of, a candle doesn't give off a shadow because it doesn't have that darkness. So if you were to look behind a candle, there's no shadow there, because light doesn't give off any kind of darkness. So
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Way cool. So thanks for sharing that. So Nate, how do our listeners get a hold of you, or how would they, get in touch with you, or how can they get a hold of you if they need or would like to do that?
Well, thank you. I think the best way is the website, thestandingmeditation.com. And actually right now that goes straight to my book's Amazon page, because I think that's the best way. I wrote that book, like if someone's starting at square one, how do they figure this whole spiritual walk thing out? How do they build a healthy habit on a practical level? So I kind of weave that with all the weird stories that happened in my life. And if I can change someone's life with that, I'm happy.
That's awesome. Great conversation. I've loved your insight. Again, thank you so much for opening up to us and sharing your stories and the lessons that you've learned. Very much appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Jason. It's been my honor to be here.